Could you be our dad? Just for one day? The twin girls looked up at the stranger by the school gate, their voices trembling but their eyes filled with hope. Around them other children were rushing into their parents' arms. Only the two of them remained on an old wooden bench, clutching the school's family day notice. The man, a young millionaire, who had just left a meeting, never imagined that such a simple question would upend his entire life. The silver SUV was still running, heat spilling into the late afternoon air. The man who stepped out immediately drew attention. A dark, finely tailored suit, neatly combed hair, a gleaming watch on his wrist, all of it made him look out of place against the bustle of an ordinary elementary school. This was Matthew Cole, 32 years old, a self-made millionaire from Boston's startup world. To outsiders, he was the symbol of success technology projects admired by investors, a face rarely seen in public yet always spoken of with respect. But at this very moment, he was not a keynote speaker in a grand hall or a cold negotiator in a closed-door meeting. He was simply a man standing at a school gate, shaken by two innocent eyes. Lily and Harper, the twin girls, appeared so small and fragile by the old green iron gate. While parents rushed to gather their children, they stood quietly, clutching the family day notice. Their eyes fixed on Matthew, not because he was a millionaire, not because of the expensive car. In those childlike gazes, he was simply an opportunity, a figure who might fill the vast emptiness in an unfinished family drawing. The sudden request came simple, sincere, trembling yet fervent. Could you be our dad? Just for one day? The question landed heavier than any multi-million-dollar contract Matthew had ever signed. He froze, his breath caught. The noisy world behind him seemed to recede, leaving only 3 people at the school gate, connected by a wish that looked so simple, yet was immense. Matthew had never felt so unmoored. He was used to quick decisions, hard numbers, and swift deals. But faced with the round eyes of 2 children, he faltered, searching for an answer even he did not know. He forced a smile, letting out a polite line, a gentle refusal, the kind that had become second nature in his business world. But when Lily's small shoulders dropped, her fragile smile fading, his chest tightened unexpectedly. Harper, the quicker of the 2, turned away slightly. Yet before walking off, she glanced back and said softly, just loud enough for Matthew to hear, Friday, 10 a.m., in case you change your mind. The small words cut sharper than any boardroom exchange, like a needle piercing the invisible armor he wore to shield himself from emotion. The SUV rolled off into Boston's rush-hour traffic. The radio still carried economic news. His phone still rang with partners calling, but Matthew heard nothing except the echo of those words. Again and again, the image of the 2 little girls standing in the crowd replayed, like a slow-motion film he couldn't turn off. He remembered his own childhood, long afternoons, waiting for his mother to finish her shift at the factory, yearning for the grasp of a guiding hand. That emptiness he thought he had buried. But now, with a single innocent request, it resurfaced, leaving his heart trembling. That night, the luxury apartment high above the Charles River offered none of its usual calm. Matthew sat alone on the balcony, a glass of wine untouched in his hand. The city lights sparkled, but all he saw in his mind were Lily and Harper's eyes. He tried to shake it off, reminding himself he had no place in the lives of those 2 strangers. Yet something smoldered within him, pushing him to think otherwise. That childish question, seemingly simple, had planted a seed he could not extinguish. He didn't know what he would do, didn't dare to imagine what lay ahead, but he knew he was no longer the same. For once a heart trembles at the innocence of children, cold logic becomes meaningless. Matthew had no idea that his decision in the days to come would not only change the lives of 2 little girls, but also reshape his own future. All right, my dear viewers, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. but only if you truly resonate with what I'm sharing. And don't forget to leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. That morning, the auditorium of Roosevelt Elementary was filled with light and brimming with anticipation. Parents sat neatly in rows, bouquets in hand, cameras at the ready, their eyes glowing with pride. The atmosphere was like a small festival where each child eagerly awaited the chance to introduce their family before the whole school. For them, today was not just a simple presentation, it was the moment to affirm that they belonged somewhere. But backstage, Lily and Harper quietly clutched each other's hands. Their tiny fingers gripped tight, trembling as if seeking borrowed courage. The drawing of their family, carefully prepared, now felt unbearably heavy. On the paper, there was a mother, the twin sisters, but on the far right, a blank space lingered. A space where a father should have been. The MC's voice rang out, calling their names, and Lily's heart pounded hard. Harper glanced at her sister. Then together they took a deep breath. But before stepping forward, their eyes swept across the room, and there, like a miracle, stood Matthew Cole. He leaned lightly against the wall, late but present. No bouquet, no camera, only a quiet gaze and a slow smile as his eyes met theirs. In that instant, it was like a current ran through the girls. Fear melted away, replaced by shimmering trust. A small wave from Matthew was enough to steady their little hearts as they stepped into the light. When Lily and Harper walked onto the stage, the auditorium hushed. Two young voices, fragile yet resolute, rose as they introduced their family drawing. On the sheet of colored paper, they pointed to each figure. Mother, themselves, then paused at the empty space uncolored. A soft murmur rose from some parents below, empathy plain in their eyes. And then, Harper lifted her head, her voice trembling but strong. This is the missing part, but we believe that one day it won't be empty anymore. The whole room fell silent for a moment. Next came the song the sisters had practiced for weeks. The innocent, crystal-clear melody floated into every corner of the hall. With each lyric, their eyes drifted to the back of the room where Matthew stood, his hand unconsciously clenching and releasing as though wrestling with unspoken feelings. In his gaze shone unexpected pride and a quiet ache. A millionaire who once thought himself untouchable was now completely undone by two small voices. When the song ended, the hall erupted in applause. Laughter and cheers resounded everywhere. But for Lily and Harper, the sound that echoed deepest was the vigorous, resounding applause from the back of the room. Matthew clapped until his hands reddened, rising to his feet, as though to make up for every round of applause the girls had once longed for but never received. Their eyes met. Lily smiled faintly. Harper nodded, and Matthew slowly placed his hand over his chest as a silent promise that he understood and that he was here. The other children rushed to their parents, proudly showing drawings, singing snatches of songs. Lily and Harper, too, returned backstage, but their steps were lighter than ever. They no longer felt alone in that crowded auditorium. A figure, once a stranger, had brought them a warmth they had never known, simply by standing on their side. Matthew kept watching, his mind in turmoil. He had never planned to come, nor imagined that his mere presence could carry such power. But now he knew the choice he had made at the school gate days earlier had opened a door that could never be closed again. Would this unexpected presence last only a single day? Or had it just become the first step toward a bond no one could have foreseen? After the applause in the auditorium gradually faded, a wave of excitement swept across the schoolyard. Children rushed into their parents' arms, proudly showing their drawings, their presentations, their songs. Laughter, shouts, and footsteps resounded, painting a picture of overflowing happiness. Amid the scene, only Lily and Harper slowed their steps, as though afraid that joy would vanish if they ran too fast. And then, Instinctively, their eyes turned toward the end of the hallway, where the tall, familiar figure still stood, and together they hesitantly walked toward him. Matthew hadn't left. He leaned lightly against the wall, his gaze following the bustling crowd. When he saw the two little girls approaching, his chest tightened. No longer a guarded look, in their eyes he saw pure, childlike gratitude. Lily bowed her head slightly, lips moving just enough for a whispered thank you to escape. Harper stood beside her, holding her sister's hand, her wide eyes glowing with a joy too simple to need words. Matthew had been ready to turn away, to return to the packed schedule awaiting him, yet something held him back. His voice slipped out almost unconsciously, surprising even himself. A simple suggestion about having lunch. In that moment, he wasn't thinking of meetings or contracts waiting to be signed. He was only thinking of the small joy these girls deserved after such a courageous day. The Riverside Diner along the Charles that day was nothing remarkable. Worn wooden tables, old photos hanging on the walls, dim yellow lights casting a soft haze. But for the three who walked in, it became an entirely new world. Lily and Harper chose the table by the window, where they could watch the afternoon light dancing on the river. Matthew sat across from them, awkward in a way he rarely felt, like a guest out of place in this ordinary scene. The food arrived. A grilled cheese sandwich, a plate of fries, a few fizzy sodas. So simple, so unlike anything Matthew was used to. He was more familiar with lavish dinners in high-rise restaurants, where silverware gleamed and wine glasses were filled to the brim. Yet here, between bites of gooey cheese sandwiches, he found a taste he knew he would never forget. The twins chattered about their lives. Their stories circled around the most ordinary of things. The street they walked home on, the struggle of group assignments, splitting a snack when hungry, or the night they stayed up late coloring their project. Matthew listened, every word falling straight into a place he thought he had buried. He heard a maturity in their voices, sensed a quiet resilience childhood should never have to bear. Lily's eyes lit up as she spoke of her dream of becoming an artist. Harper, in her carefree way, announced she wanted to be a teacher, so I can always be around kids. Matthew smiled, but his smile carried a hint of ache. He realized that behind their innocence lay a gaping emptiness they were trying to patch with hope and dreams. In every glance, every smile, Matthew felt himself sliding out of the world he knew. No more cold numbers, no more fierce negotiations. Instead, there was the clear laughter of two little girls, and small stories brimming with tenderness. A warmth rose in him, so strong he dared not move, afraid it would shatter the fragile moment. The meal didn't last long, but it left a lasting aftertaste. As they stepped out, the evening sun gilded the river, the breeze carrying a faint salt tang from the distant sea. Lily and Harper skipped ahead, laughter ringing out. Matthew followed behind, watching their small figures, and for the first time, a feeling he had never allowed himself to consider welled up inside him. The desire to stay. He knew this lunch was only a fleeting slice of time, yet it was enough to shake the walls he had built around himself for so many years. And in his confusion, a question crept into his mind, making his heart ache with every beat. My dear viewers, take a breath, maybe grab a glass of water, and stay with us. The story ahead is full of surprises. Comment 1 if you think this story is worth it, so we'll know you're still here with us. That afternoon, the golden light stretched across the narrow streets of Dorchester. Matthew drove the SUV slowly, and in the rearview mirror were the two small faces still glowing with joy after lunch. They chattered away, pointing at shops along the road, restaurants they often passed, adding in little fragments of their daily stories. For Matthew, every giggle seemed to erase the cold rhythm of life he had grown used to. Then the car stopped in front of an old 3-story building, its dark brick walls and narrow windows marked with time. He followed Lily and Harper up the creaking stairs to a third-floor apartment. Inside, everything was so modest it made him pause. Children's drawings covered the walls, a small desk sat by the window with neatly stacked books, a wooden chair with peeling paint. Nothing luxurious, yet there was a strange coziness here, the kind of warmth money could never buy. Matthew quietly observed, noting the traces of careful effort. An old plastic vase scrubbed clean, patched curtains always pulled neatly aside. He was about to ask a few polite questions when the front door suddenly opened. A hurried figure stepped in, grocery bags in hand, still cold from outside. It was Grace Turner, the mother of Lily and Harper. In that instant, the room seemed to freeze. Grace stopped short, her eyes meeting Matthew's undations, and her face immediately changed. The grocery bag slipped from her hand, red apples rolling across the wooden floor until they bumped against Matthew's feet. The air turned heavy. The girls ran up, excitedly telling their mother that a special guest had picked them up and even had lunch with them. Grace forced a smile, stroked their hair, then quickly guided them into their room, gently saying she needed to speak with that man for a while. The door closed, leaving only Matthew and Grace in the small kitchen. Evening light streamed through the narrow window, casting her face in patches of shadow and glow, worn yet resilient. Matthew stood still, a chill racing down his spine. He didn't understand why Grace had reacted that way, but instinct told him something far beyond his expectations was about to unfold. In the silence, Grace drew a deep breath, her eyes conflicted. Then, as though unable to carry it any longer, she released the confession that had weighed on her heart for years. "They are your children, Matthew." At that moment, everything collapsed in his mind. Old fragments of memory surged back one long night in a luxury hotel during a launch party, when he was still a young man hungry to prove himself, reckless with alcohol and music. A fleeting connection forgotten by him like countless meaningless indulgences of youth. But for Grace, it had been the beginning of a long journey raising children alone. Matthew was stunned, his trembling hand resting on the wooden table. The room suddenly felt too small to contain the storm rising within him. He couldn't speak, only heard the pounding of his own heart, each beat like it would tear through his chest. The pieces began to align. Lily's familiar eyes, Harper's bright smile, details he only now recognized. Each carried a part of him. Grace looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears but fearless. For years she had borne the burden of being both father and mother to protect those little lives. This confession was not a demand, not an accusation, only a truth that finally had to be spoken. The air seemed frozen. Matthew wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why hadn't she told him? Why the silence for 7 years? Why fate had chosen such a cruel twist? But his lips only moved soundlessly. In front of him, memories of his own fatherless childhood surged back, colliding with the reality that he too had unknowingly let his children grow up with that same absence. In the next room, Lily and Harper's giggles floated out, carefree, piercing Matthew's heart all the more. He knew that from this moment he could no longer see himself as an outsider. But was he ready to become what those two children had long yearned for? Now that the secret was out, would Matthew walk away from this small apartment and continue life as if nothing had happened, or would he face the truth and embrace the role of father that fate had placed into his hands? The apartment door closed behind him after the shattering confrontation, and Matthew descended the stairs with legs heavy as lead, the usual bustle of Dorchester now blurred into something distant, unreal. In his mind, Grace's words still echoed, each one cutting like a blade. "They are your children." A single sentence, yet powerful enough to dismantle everything he had believed his life to be. The next morning, Matthew arrived at the office earlier than usual. Boston buzzed with energy, traffic clogged the streets, but from his high-rise window the city looked colorless. Before him lay files waiting for signatures, fundraising calls to confirm. rows of numbers glittering with success, all of it suddenly meaningless. He buried himself in work, not out of passion, but as an escape from a truth too heavy to face. During meetings, while others spoke, his gaze drifted. What appeared in his mind was not profit charts, but Lily's timid smile, Harper's fragile eyes, and the sound of their carefree laughter skipping outside the Riverside diner. Each night back in his luxury apartment, he sat by the window overlooking the Charles, a glass of wine untouched in his hand. The silence gnawed at him, but he lacked the courage to take even a single step forward. In Dorchester, the mother and daughters lived through long, tense days. Grace tried to maintain routine, school runs, meals, housework. Yet in her eyes lingered quiet worry. Every night, Lily and Harper asked the same question, their soft voices tearing at her heart. "Doesn't he want to be our dad?" Grace pulled them close, swallowing her sighs, but Matthew's silence was a void she could not fill. The small joy they had felt after the school presentation now turned into a piercing memory. Sitting at their desk, the girls hesitated to draw their family again. This time they shaded the missing figure more heavily than put the crayon down, leaving the empty space raw and unhealed. Grace was afraid. Not just because Matthew had vanished, but because of the possibility that he might return not as the man they'd known briefly, but as a wealthy millionaire armed with every advantage. She knew the law often favored those who had more money, more connections, more power. The thought robbed her of sleep, night after night. As she lay listening to her daughter's breathing, her own heart weighted down. Meanwhile, Matthew wrestled with a different torment. He remembered his own fatherless childhood, long, cold evenings waiting outside the factory gates for a father who never came. That pain had once fueled his hunger for success, but now it echoed as a bitter reminder. Was he letting his own children repeat the same cycle? On the fifth day, Matthew sat in his office, staring out the window. Below, a young father carried his child on his shoulders, strolling along the sidewalk. An ordinary image, yet it stopped him cold. He realized he could buy anything, houses, cars, power, but he could not buy back lost time, nor the smiles of the two little girls still waiting for him. Silence was no longer an escape. It had become a knife, cutting into him and into the innocent. Matthew understood. If he kept running, he would lose the one treasure fate had finally placed in his hands. My dear viewers, comment 1 if you think this story is worth it, so we'll know you're still here with us. That afternoon, the Boston harbor was draped in the colors of a blazing sunset. The crimson sun sank slowly into the shimmering water as seagulls wheeled above, creating a scene that was both peaceful and heavy with premonition. In the salty breeze carrying the breath of the ocean, the familiar SUV rolled to a stop in front of the old brick building in Dorchester. When the engine died, a heavy silence remained, like the pause before a heart speaks its most important truth. The car door opened. Matthew stepped out, weariness etched into his every movement. The past days had drained him body and mind. Yet, unlike before, his eyes now carried a rare steadiness. He was no longer the man who hid behind glass towers. He had come here to face everything. At the apartment gate, Lily and Harper sat side by side, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. When they saw the familiar car, they froze, their eyes a mix of surprise and hope. Their tiny hands gripped each other tightly, hearts racing, as if waiting for a miracle fragile yet desperately wished for. Matthew approached. He stopped before the girls, then suddenly knelt, his trembling hands closing around theirs. A brief silence fell, broken only by the wind whistling through the narrow windows. Then his voice came, choked but resolute. He apologized for disappearing, admitting he had needed time to put everything in order, to learn how to be a father. And he promised that from this day on he would be present not just for one day, but forever. In that moment, tears began to fall. Lily broke first, her sob bursting like the release of long-held waiting. Harper couldn't hold back, throwing her arms around Matthew's neck, her small body trembling with emotion. In his embrace, the two little souls were no longer alone. The empty space was finally filled. From a distance, Grace stood still, a grocery bag still in her hand. The scene before her blurred with tears. 7 years of strength, of endurance, of never daring to believe in miracles, now all of it dissolved into a new faith. Matthew had returned, no longer a fleeting visitor, but a true father. That evening, the small kitchen glowed with light. For the first time, the three of them sat down to dinner with Matthew. A simple meal, vegetable soup, slices of cold meat, toasted bread, yet it carried a warmth beyond measure. Matthew listened to his daughter's laughter, watched the gestures he had missed for 7 years. Every bite of food, every whisper from Lily, every tilt of Harper's head, each became priceless. Inside him, a quiet resolve took root. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be doubts, challenges, even Grace's guarded caution. But he had made his choice, and once chosen, he would not turn his back again. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Matthew sat at their desk staring at the unfinished family drawing on the wall. The empty corner now seemed to call to him, inviting him to place himself there. He smiled faintly, his hand brushing the blank space as though signing a contract with his own heart. Outside the window, the night sky glittered with stars. Dorchester was more peaceful than ever. And inside that small apartment, for the first time in years, Grace, Lily, Harper, and Matthew all felt a fragile yet undeniable sense of wholeness. But would Matthew's promise be strong enough to withstand the storms that lay ahead? Or would the past find a way to tear him from the home he had just reclaimed? That weekend morning, the small road leading to the outskirts of Brookline was bathed in golden sunlight. The air was fresher, carrying the faint scent of young grass. The silver SUV rolled forward slowly, silence inside the car heavy with anticipation. Matthew gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, his eyes glancing now and then into the rearview mirror to catch the eager smiles of Lily and Harper. Beside him, Grace sat quietly, her heart pounding with every turn. She didn't know what awaited her, only that something momentous was drawing near. The car stopped in front of a modest 2-story house, radiating warmth. White paint, a low wooden fence, a tall tree spreading its branches behind like protective arms. On the porch, purple climbing flowers swayed in the breeze like a welcome. Matthew opened the car door and spoke just one simple line that carried everything within it. "We're home." Grace froze. For her, home had always meant the cramped old apartment in Dorchester, crowded but full of memories. She hardly dared to believe in such a change. But Matthew's steady gaze told her this wasn't charity, it was a new beginning. He wasn't building walls to flaunt his power, but a home to fill the emptiness in her and the children's hearts. Lily and Harper dashed inside instantly. Their joyous shouts echoed throughout the house. Upstairs, they found 2 new beds neatly made with soft pastel sheets. In the corner stood a tall bookshelf. By the window, a desk with colored pencils, sketch paper, and a small easel. Every detail felt prepared from the heart, not the wallet. The twins hugged each other tightly, eyes shining, before rushing to the backyard where the great tree spread its sturdy limbs. Harper pointed upward, whispering that this would be the perfect place to build a treehouse, the dream they had spoken of so many times but had never thought would come true. While the girls explored, Grace stood still on the porch. She looked at Matthew, wanting to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "This isn't charity. This is the home the girls need, and I want to build it with you." The words lifted a weight from her shoulders as though the burden of years was finally shared. Tears spilled over. But this time, they were tears of trust and hope. The science fair at Roosevelt Elementary came quickly. In the packed hall of students and parents, Lily and Harper confidently presented their water cycle model, built with Matthew's guidance. Their small voices were clear as they pointed to clouds, rain, rivers, lakes, explaining the cycle's endless flow. When they finished, Harper lifted her head, her eyes sparkling with pride. And we made this with the help of our dad. The hall thundered with applause. Matthew stood in the crowd, his heart swelling. In that moment, he was no longer the cold millionaire, no longer a man obsessed with numbers. He was a father, plain and proud. The applause wasn't only for the girls, but also an unspoken acknowledgement that he had chosen the right path. From afar, Grace watched, her hand pressed gently against her chest. Before her was a family she had once believed existed only in dreams. After years of solitude, after countless exhausted nights, she finally allowed herself to believe happiness was real. A new home, new laughter, and a new future had opened for them all. Outside, the May wind blew strong, carrying the scent of wildflowers from distant fields. One chapter had closed, and the door to a new one swung wide, full of promise, but not without challenge. There are spaces in the heart that only love and presence can fill. The story of Matthew, Grace, Lily, and Harper reminds us that family is not only made by blood, but also by the choice and the courage to stay. Sometimes a simple promise is enough to heal years of hurt. Thank you for walking with this story. If any part touched your heart, leave a comment right now, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to continue following these inspiring journeys. Tell us, where are you watching from? And what time is it there when this story reached you most deeply?